Day, which is on future of work and role of gig workers. The session will be moderated by Mr. Gopal Iyer, VP IIM-Ahmedabad and an executive coach. The speakers of the session are Mr. Rajul Mathur, consulting and growth leader, Willis Towers Watson, and Mr. Anurag Malik, partner and India leader, Ernst & Young. May I please call all of you on stage?
Great. So, this is going to be a very interesting 40-45 minutes of conversation. And it's about the future of work and gig workers. As we enter 2023, future of work has become the now of work. Many of the changes that started during pandemic were accelerated and have now become permanent aspects of our lives. Be it focus on employee well-being or focus on skills, even flexibility demands that employees expect, or last but not even least, the elephant in the room. Yes, that's the one. Would ChatGPT take our careers? Employees today have multiple challenges to battle with. I'm Gopal Iyer, Vice President at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and an executive coach. With future of work now being now, ways of work are certainly evolving. Gig economy, platform economy, moonlighting, flexible working arrangements. We heard it all this morning through the white paper. It's an interesting panel that we have today. We have Mr. Anurag Malik. He's the People Consulting Workforce Advisory Partner at EY India. He also leads EY's organization and people field of play for Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa, which gives him an opportunity to drive growth of EY's people consulting solutions across these regions. He's a postgraduate from XLRI and has previously worked with Arthur Andersen in their HR consulting practice and with Asian Paints as part of the corporate HR function. He truly believes in the power of applying next generation technologies for solving new and conventional people HR problems. He enjoys incubating, mentoring, and supporting HR technology startups. And we also have Rajul Mathur, consulting and growth leader, Willis Towers Watson. He's India growth leader and international for the work and rewards business of Willis Towers Watson. He's an MBA from IIM-Ahmedabad, proud to have an alum here, and an engineering graduate from IIT Roorkee, and has total experience of more than 22 years across consulting and operations. His consulting expertise is across multiple industries, geographies, and solution areas. He's particularly passionate about enabling both people and organizations towards a path to better futures through his work. So, gentlemen, we have about 40 minutes now, and I hope by the end of this conversation we should have all the answers to future of work, and which is why we have futurists or future gurus, don't we? So the first question is to you, Anurag. There is a lot of talk, articles, debates about future of work. Why is it so important? And how could organization address it now?
Future of work. Am I audible? Am I audible at the back? Yes. Okay, excellent. Before I get to that question, just wanted to get a sense of the audience so that I can at least ensure that what I'm speaking is relevant for a majority of the audience. How many of you are true giggers? If you can just raise your hands. Okay. And how many of you work with corporates in full-time roles? Awesome. And how many of you are academicians? Okay. Students? Awesome. Okay. That gives me a sense. So
I'm a gigger at heart.
I know. As NHRD and Noble House invited me for this session, I was just wondering, I've been in the same job for 21 years. So, talking about gig economy, giggers is like, talking about cricket to a group of budding cricketers where you've actually never played cricket. So I must confess, I'm one that's been sitting on the ropes. But I must also confess that, given my people consulting role, I get the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations, advising them on gig strategy, workforce strategies of the future. I do work with a lot of giggers, so hopefully I'll use some of that experience. So thanks for having me here. Future of work. Okay, so let's. Future of work has got multiple implications to it. Let me try and limit myself only to the topic that all of us have got together for, which is gig workforce. So I'll try and just share my views there. Before I share certain perspective, let me share some personal data. As I was driving for this morning, coming to the location, I was thinking about my clients. In my role, I get the privilege of working for a lot of organizations. I see a lot of my clients, CHRO clients sitting here, so they'd relate to it. And I was just wondering how relevant it is for my clients, right? Since we're talking about future of work, what am I listening? What am I hearing now? What are they saying about the future? And there are a few things that struck me. I was with a organization, fairly large organization, CHR of a large organization yesterday, and we were discussing their workforce mix, and he was telling me that they're about 9,000 full-time employees, and they have about 50,000 plus gig workforce. Okay, let me qualify. I'm using the word gig, broadly here. So we debated, contract manpower, full-time equivalents, gig workforce. So I'm using it a little broadly. But what we were discussing is, he was telling me that 2 years back, they were about 8,000 full-time manpower and about 12,000 or what he calls gig workforce. So full-time manpower in the last 2 to 3 years, and this is a sector and organization that's growing tremendously, has grown about 10%. The gig workforce has grown 5 times, 4 to 5 times in the last 5 years. Just one example, last 3 years, just one example. The other example, I was just thinking about myself. I thought it'd be good to share personal examples to make it relevant for all of you. As I was introduced, I run the people consulting workforce advisory business for EY in India. I have the privilege of working, with about 500 or HR professionals. I largely work with HR folks. Data for all of you, and I'm very transparent on this because I need more giggers. 2 years back, we had less than 3% of gig workforce. We were just using a few coaches, a few what we call leadership development or assessment specialists, right? Now, out of 500 people, we have 100 gig workforce colleagues, just in my business. It has grown disproportionately, right? It's just grown exponentially. And my sense is, I just give you one of my example and my client's example, and I could think about so many more, that it's the sign of things to come, right? And if you're not thinking about it I see a lot of HR folks here, as part of your workforce strategy, you're missing a very big block. Okay. Let me give you some data points. Is it okay if I go on for 2 or 3 minutes? Maybe just as some opening remarks. Let me give you some data points. So EY does a survey called, as consultant, you'll get a lot of data from me. So EY does a survey called the Workforce Reimagined Survey, okay, where every 3 to 4 months, we go and speak to about 16,000 people globally, asking for their view on emerging trends. As employees, what are they thinking? What's top of their mind? As CHROs, CXOs, what are they thinking? And we do it every 3 or 4 months because it's been amazing. Last few years, views change every few months. When HR heads ask me, where Musarrat-san asked me, Anurag, kya chal raha hai, what's the latest trend? He doesn't expect me to talk from 4 months back. Things change dramatically. So some data that might be of interest to you. 47% people globally, when spoken to, say that we are looking at changing jobs in the next 1 year. 47% people. By the way, since we do it every 4 months, this data pre-pandemic was 22%. So in the last 2 to 3 years, yes, pandemic and other factors have contributed to, number of people who are saying, I want to change jobs, I'm open to changing jobs, is again increased dramatically. Okay. one data point for you, and hence, this fluidity, flexibility in the workforce. Another data point is that when we ask people about flexibility, how important it is. We're talking about giggers, so flexibility both from where and when to work. 57% people in the last survey said it is extremely important for them. They would leave jobs, they would change jobs if both where and when is not relevant. Okay, I'm sure all of you would relate to Gen X, Gen Z, sorry, millennials. I see some of them. It's a reality. So if you're having to cater to this kind of a workforce, okay, the saying today is that, I've just changed one job. So, again, it's like somebody from the outside talking about cricket. But anyway, the data is that most people today will change 10 to 11 jobs over the course of their careers. My sense is in the next 5 years, it might even double. So last data point, and again, I'm sticking to future of work is, or two more data points. When I talk to HR heads, again, coming back to HR heads, they've suddenly started saying, Anurag, it takes me 4 months today at an average to get a full-time hire, right? So from the point I agree on a vacancy requisition or agree or approve a vacancy requisition, from that time to getting a person on board, it takes me 4 months, right? Most of my business, when I talk to my business leaders, they laugh at it. They said, what are you saying? 4 months? So I need to figure out ways of getting people faster. The second thing they tell me is that the cost of replacement, a full-time hire, is between 1 to 1.5 to 2x of salary cost. All the, what you pay placement consultants, the vacancy fill-up time lost, training cost, productivity improvement, it's massive. And another trend, and again, Musarrat San, sorry Musarrat San, aap samne baithe huye to aapka naam aa raha hai baar baar. We were just talking about it outside, coming in, is a lot of the HR heads today say that the focus is shifting from a level tenure-based workforce to a skill-based workforce. So we're more and more as organizations thinking about skills. So again, when I used to think employees, I used to think manager, senior manager, I'm now thinking skills, and hence my ability to get, gig workforce is big, because it's helping me very specifically isolate skills that I require, I need to get quickly. And the last point, again, another point of data from a consultant. Every year, what about 5 million people are joining the workforce. Now, मैं भूल जाता हूँ, million and lakh में confuse हो जाता हूँ. We are not creating as many, not even as many close to full-time jobs in the country. So whatever you call it, gig, part-time, contract-based work is a massive reality for us going forward. It's good that we are recognizing it. It's important that we recognize it even more. So that's my thoughts on future of work.
That's really insightful, and I think the numbers do say that it is something that is staring at us, and we need to really, as HR leaders, start thinking about that. So talking about gig economy, the question for you, Rajul, is it's a phenomenon, as a lot of people used to say in the past. What are your thoughts about that? And where do you see it, evolving in 2023 and beyond? And what do CXOs need to do differently than what they have been doing thus far?
So thank you. Good morning, everyone. So the challenge with actually having 2 consultants is that you can get bombarded with a lot of data. So what I'll do is maybe take that little bit of data part out of my conversation and maybe put it at the other side that consultants like, put a framework to the whole conversation and say, how does the framework talk to the data point that has been provided by Anurag? So if you look at, this whole work thing, and if you look at it right back from, say, the second industrial revolution to where we are today, you definitely see a pattern in terms of how the entire workforce has evolved. So you look at the assembly line, that is the second industrial revolution, the assembly line happened, organizations were more like, social institutions, if I may say so. Everybody was together, and jobs, there were these defined jobs which got created, and these jobs, and people would look at joining an organization, and like Anurag also said, and would retire from that same organization. So there were careers that were built on that. Then came the advent of technology, right? So we had internet, we had web. So what happened was that the work changed slightly in terms of the nature of work that was happening. So we kind of created processes. What these processes did was that we had advent of established ways of what we need to do, what we can perhaps outsource. And therefore this whole evolution of the outsourcing industry happened. And we were able to segregate what part of the work I need to do, what I can contract to somebody else, and they need to do on my behalf. So the organization became actually a contractual obligation, and the job got delineated in terms of whether this job has to be done in-house or can it be contracted as well. Now we are looking at something what we call as the fourth revolution in terms of industrialization, where we have all these new technologies like artificial intelligence, we have machine learning, we have ChatGPT now, which is very recent. And what this is doing is a couple of changes with respect to how work is actually looked at. Now work is actually getting segregated into what we call as tasks, and organizations are taking an outlook with respect to how these tasks need to be done rather than how these jobs need to be done. The second is with respect to the organization is no longer either a contract or a socialistic organization or a social place. It is more becoming like a platform. So a platform where different kinds of tasks are done, and that platform needs to be able to attract the right kind of talent. And talent, by the way, has become talent on demand. So I need a particular kind of talent for doing X, another kind of talent to do Y, another type of talent to do Z. So if we look at even the nature of the way the work has evolved, so it is also providing us, and technology is also providing us with that opportunity to be able to exercise some of these choices, which say, for example, were not there at the time of second industrial revolution or the third industrial revolution. So that's more from a theoretical construct of where we are and therefore why we need to look at this. The other is if we look at tasks. Now these tasks could be further segregated into multiple ways. So you can have, the task could be of the type of repeated task versus variable task. So that could be one framework to look at. The other framework to look at could be that tasks are independent in nature or tasks are variable in nature. So, so tasks are independent or interactive in nature. So it requires an interaction with, say for example, different kinds of stakeholders. Tasks could be physical in nature, could be mental in nature. And tasks could have a frequency of its own. So what we are seeing right now is that all that repeated tasks and tasks which are independent are being taken over by new age technology, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning. So you will see a lot of emphasis with respect to digitization, automation is happening on those areas, which is, if I look at any kind of variable task, and then I use the construct of whether it requires interdependence or it is independent, or whether it requires any place where it requires a intervention which is a mental intervention, and there is a frequency variation attached to it. All those are the areas of tasks which are open to gig workforce. And therefore it is becoming extremely relevant to say that if 70 to 80% of the construct of the work that I want to do is happening in a way which is the construct that I shared earlier, then why should I not look at ways in which I can expect benefits both in terms of quality of talent, in terms of being able to choose talent over a period of time, so I don't need to get myself tied to a particular type of talent, and also with respect to perhaps my overall cost to delivery of that work equation as well, because then I don't need to have somebody and plan careers and so on and so forth. So therefore it has become very important, and your question in terms of CXOs, to decide on what is the leverage that they want to use from a gig workforce. I can say that I need to start with a very small leverage, and I only give the tasks which are repeated in nature and which are independent, and maybe something which is very simplified. I can even look at tasks which are in the independent bucket but with high skill, something like coaching, which is extremely prevalent, which are independent nature of tasks, which require a lot of interactions, but are very, very variable. So I can use that, and that is something companies try and use to start with. But we've also witnessed companies which actually use this as a business model, and therefore leverage the whole equation with respect to their clients to say, how can we generate a significantly different value for you and take it forward in terms of a value proposition itself. That's where the true maturization of the benefit of the whole gig economy comes into play. So I eventually use some data. Let me go with this. So we also do something at WTW, what is called as pathways to digital kind of survey. And the numbers are something which are very similar to what Anurag said, right? There is in the minds of CXOs a greater awareness of around 60 to 65% to say that we are open to utilizing gig workforce. I think this mindset change has been brought about significantly by the pandemic. Earlier, around 25 to 30% of the mindset, even in terms of the CXO, was there in terms of using gig force. Now it is around 65%. I think the question now comes in how organizations will be able to create this community of people which are outside of the organization, how they are able to leverage it. Why should, say, for example, a gig workforce work with a consulting firm A versus a consulting firm B? And how should I be able to attract that gig workforce, whilst not giving that person a career, by purely a career or a compensation view as well? So how do I create that community which grows by itself, is capable and is ready to work with me on a time frame which I want, and not, say, for example, always that they want. So that is where my thought from an overall perspective is, and sorry I didn't give too much data because you had already provided. I'll take that.
So I was having an interesting conversation with one of the technology leaders yesterday, and he was saying that there is a lot of cost pressure this year, and probably it will remain for a few more years given recessionary fears that exist. Now, in that context, and this question is for both of you, is gig model or gig economy model for corporates more a strategic initiative or a more cost-saving methods? What's your view on that?
I think it's a strategic initiative more than anything else. It's a strategic workforce initiative more than anything else, and from multiple dimensions. I mean, I alluded to some of them, Rajul alluded to some of that. Maybe let me underline some of those points again. Number one is that when you're looking at your workforce cost in line with your business cost, I mean, the term agile is also percolated into workforce planning. So the definition of agility is that how much is the fixed workforce cost that I can carry, and how much is I want to be agile, depending on how my business is growing. And it's not only about revenue growth or top line growth, it's also the business mix growth. I want to be agile, and I want to flex. So it's my agile, my flex workforce. And interestingly, it's a part of, it's now beautifully appeared in those workforce planning Excel sheets that organizations use. My full-time workforce. I mean, people are still, as I said, trying to figure out the difference between, contract and gig and part-timers. I think there's still, bit of ambiguity or, continuity around that, but absolutely. So that is number one. Number two is, and Rajul alluded to it, it's actually a reality from a skill mix point of view also. Again, I'll give my example. In people consulting today, as I go and meet CHROs, even while we spend a lot of time trying to predict that what's the ask of CHRO, what's the demand in the market, I'm not able to predict it to a 100% level, and that's where we've come to a 80% level. 80% we know, broadly know, and our models are able to throw up what's the skill mix that I'll require. But 20%, I also want to be agile. Those skills, I want to have the ability to be able to draw those skills very, very quickly. Yes, using platforms like Noble House and others, but it is a reality of that skill mix. To give you an example, a client of mine, a global client of mine, driving, they're driving multiple transformation programs globally. I went into a discussion, we do leadership development work for them, told me that we are experimenting with this concept of change as a service. At any point of time, I need 80 to 100 change management specialists, and I'm taking an HR example since a lot of you raised hands as HR professionals. Anurag, can you give us, anything from 10 to 40 change management professionals for singular demands? It is an unbelievable ask. Now, when I say 40 change management professionals, they were talking about a massive, success factor implementation globally. And they said, there is no way I'll be able to service this demand internally. So suddenly for me, it's an opportunity where I would never have estimated just change as a skill, but to be able to flex and be able to get that skill. Again, the client's not committing to me that I need X numbers on an ongoing basis. They're saying, can you do it for us as a service? Can I rely on you that when I call you and ask for a 10 or a 30 or a 40 number, you'll be able to get those people? And again, it's the point I was making earlier about it's not about being able to get them with a 4-month timeline. Do you have the ability of getting them for me at a 15 to 30 days maximum kind of a timeline? So both strategic workforce planning, cost, but also a skill reality today that's there in the economy.
Sure. You want to add?
Sure. Yeah, just a couple of points maybe. So, and Anurag rightly said that most of the organizations right now are looking at it from a strategic perspective. But there is a spectrum as well. So, there are some which are just trying to fill in gaps, which they currently have. So, that's more transactional nature. I have an immediate requirement, I'll fill a gap, and I will use these platforms to source that gap, because fortunately we have platforms right now where you can actually access these skills. Otherwise, it was just left to, say for example, the relationships that the senior management team or the network within the team actually had to be able to access those kind of skills. The other organizations are looking at it in a mix of moving forward in certain areas or certain functions, say for example. So, so if I have, say for example, data analytics as a requirement, I am a traditional manufacturing organization. I do not have that agile data analytics as a function, but I can do a lot with the kind of sensors that I have placed in the organization. So let me look at creating this team, and from a perspective of from a partner team, from a gig workforce, which can actually give me insights. Maybe I don't need them on a daily basis. I need them on a monthly basis to provide me those insights on what has happened in my organization over the last 1 month or so. So that's another kind of business model that the firms are experimenting. And the third is where actually the organization is saying, this is my strategic value. I have a separate business value out of this. And the example that he gave, so if I need change management professionals, so this is something that a consulting firm was not doing earlier, but now has the capability to actually add a business line. To say that now if an organization was to look at doing 40 change agents, I can't hire 40 change agents with the kind of headcount pressures that we always have. So but have a team which is outside of my organizations of 40 change agents available with me, and I can actually leverage that and therefore make it as a separate business line for myself. So that's truly the way where gig workforce will eventually get used, to say that I'm not using it incrementally or not using it in a piecemeal manner, but that is part of my workforce which is sitting outside, and that is the value that I deliver to different organizations. The advantage that I have is this 40 on change could tomorrow become this 40, say for example, on OD, and now these communities are available. So I just need to be aware of those communities, and the platforms therefore have these responsibilities to create these communities with different expertise, so that whenever there is a requirement for me, I can actually leverage that whole business model and create this as a service. I think the challenge that we'll get to after certain years would be, how do we manage this workforce outside of our own organizations? How do platforms manage it? Because right now we are in a situation where a lot of gig force is at a place where they are not able to take a call between should I do a full-time versus a gig work. Choices right now are still from an individual perspective, more in favor of let's go for a full-time job. But the new generation is actually not looking at it like this. Maybe that's when it truly becomes democratized, or if I may say so, Uberized to that extent, and we say that, and this skill is now available to all the people. And how do I engage with these communities will determine my business value proposition. Because that population of change agents of 40 is accessible to me as a consulting firm, is also accessible to him. How do I therefore take this value proposition both from that perspective and from my client's perspective to say that I am perhaps the right partner to bring the two pieces together. So that is very important going forward.
Sure, thanks. I think you brought in a very important and an interesting point, and this goes back to the role that I used to play at EY earlier on managing gig programs. One of the constant feedback from talent leaders across was apprehensions about wanting to hire gig talent on grounds like, I don't know, what if this person takes the IP and runs away? What if this person leaves so soon? What are the other kind of apprehensions that you typically see when you're having these conversations with clients?
यही पूछ लेते हैं ना. So, in all seriousness, I mean, since so many of you are from the industry, so let's say there are three buckets. Bucket number one is we represent organization, or my organization is very comfortable, dealing with the gig workforce. It's seamless for us. It's a part of culture. That's bucket number one. Bucket number two is we recognize the importance. We've started experimenting with it. We're not fully there. And bucket number three is no, we're thinking about it, but we really haven't been able to fully leverage the power of gig. So one, fully there; three, the other extreme. How many of you represent organizations that are one? Truly, if you can raise your hands, truly believe that you're able to leverage the power. It's now becoming part of the culture. One out of about 150 people. Okay. How many of you are in between? Started using it for select jobs? I think about 10. And how many of you, just to confirm, the rest are not? Yeah. So there lies the answer. That I think many of us have started realizing the power, the opportunity, but maybe there are apprehensions. You use the word apprehensions, yes. Right? There are apprehensions or other reasons. So what am I hearing, or what are we hearing from talent leaders? I think the big concern, the big apprehension. Okay, let me start with the point that you made is around confidentiality. Okay, it's not necessary point number one, but I'm just picking up for continuity of conversation. Yes, there is a challenge around confidentiality. I'll give you a real example. I was talking to a CHRO of one of the top 3 IT services company in India, and I was asking him that out of your 250,000 people, how many giggers do you have? Okay, more data for all of you. How many giggers do you have? He said 2%. I said, what? We all of us believe that IT, you're the biggest consumers of gig workforce, data scientists and even traditional Java. He said no, and he said, Anurag, the biggest concern is confidentiality. Okay, and not only confidentiality of them moving on to different organizations and working for different organizations and carrying our IP. Our concern also is what the industry calls moonlighting. Using my laptops for different jobs, my programs, my coding. It is a concern. I saw the same thing getting manifested even for sales roles. I'm just taking to the other extreme. I think it's a concern area. The second big concern area a lot of them talk about and needs to get stronger from an HR head's point of view is designing an entire hire to retire ecosystem that caters to gig workforce. I think that's a big struggle today. The other example I gave where, the HR head who I spoke about, 8,000-9,000 full-time, 50,000, gig workforce. I was asking him, what are your biggest concerns around managing this 50,000 workforce? He said, Anurag, actually, I stay awake not because of my full-time workforce, it's actually these 50,000 people. Because my auditors come and tell me, your recruitment system is not geared to manage this requirement. Okay, you have no clue on how many people, when are they joining, what's their actual date of joining. You have no idea about whether the background verification process is complete or not. How many of our join in without a BGV because you do it across the country. How many red BGV cases do you have which are people who will have a significant, maybe even criminal records who come on board? You have no idea. Your HR systems are not geared to managing this kind of a workforce. And your exit programs are also not attuned to it. People exit, they keep getting salaries. Moonlighting is a phenomenon that, in a way, some of HR leaders have also driven, or organizations have also driven, because our processes are not robust. People in their mind know that they can get away with working in different organizations. So that's challenge number 2, or apprehension number 2, that are we really geared up to manage this kind of workforce? Apprehension and challenge number 3 is that today, when it comes to jobs which are also about delivering my brand in the market to my customers, then the apprehension is even higher. That, which are the roles which have maximum giggers today? Today, frontline field force, customer calling agents. But organizations also realize these are the roles that deliver their brand in the market. Now, our systems equipped, our training mechanisms equipped, our onboarding systems equipped to be able to, ensure that they're trained to deliver that brand in the market. So multiple challenges, multiple apprehensions. I still feel a lot of them is about, maturity continuum. Interestingly, this HR head, I gave one example, but most of them today talk about the fact that their top 3 priorities is to design and have a robust, far more robust hire to retire ecosystem to manage this population. Sorry, there's another one which a lot of them talk about which is actually a little bit of ambiguity on regulations when it comes to gig workforce. Okay, I know a lot of people today, a lot of giggers write about the fact that there needs to be greater clarity, we need to be treated as employees, we need to get health benefits, etc. I think if you look at it from a large mature company, CHRO or leadership point of view, they also want that clarity. It's not that it's just a cost saving strategy for them. But while the labor codes got notified, in 2020, what's the full implication for gig workforce when it get enforced? Health benefits, what about gratuity, covered or not covered, what kind of jobs after 1 year? I think maybe it's an evolutionary process. We are going through some of those, but lack of clarity around some of those also is a area of concern and apprehension.
Great. You want to add anything on that?
Yeah, and absolutely, I agree with what Anurag was saying. Just maybe adding on to some of the points that he made. So even if you look at pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, it's also a thing about mindset. So a lot of mindset changes also happened in terms of how work is getting delivered, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. So especially if you look at financial services sector, which was really very heavy with respect to all this regulation, worry about data, and the external, obviously there were cases that they had to fight with respect to confidentiality of data. Even they, during the time of pandemic, actually crossed over a hump to say, yes, some portion of the work can actually go back and can be delivered at home. Now, this was a big mindset change for an industry, which was very, very averse to, say, for example, any kind of non-workplace kind of work getting delivered. So, like he said, it's a path, and we are moving on that path. The regulations are also moving on that path. So, it's all an evolving reality right now. Some organizations will take a bigger leap of faith on this as compared to some others. I know of a couple of e-commerce organizations where 60 to 70% of their staff is gig workforce, and I'm talking about they having more than 2,000 people. Now, that's a huge number of gig workforce to have, managing their own processes, but they are doing it in a manner because they created an ecosystem around it. They've found their guardrails, if I may say so, to be able to navigate through this path. So, it's like Anurag said, it's an evolving process. We are witnessing, say for example, the early part of it right now. But I think over the next 2 to 3 years, it will mature the way we are looking at it. From a regulation perspective, and especially the way our courts take time to resolve issues, it might take more, but I think we'll see more in the Western economies, this becoming more and more prevalent. Having said so, if I look at it from a global data, say for example, especially US, gig workforce has faced with a lot of challenge from the regulators and from trade unions. So, because from their perspective, they feel threatened as well. So, US actually faced a lot of backlash on the regulator side when gig economy, actually there was more and more emphasis being paid to gig economy. That situation will come to India as well. So, I'm not saying that will not come, it will come maybe a couple of years down the line, but I think it's a path that we are all traversing, and we are definitely going northwards in that task. So I think that is not the doubt. I think the doubt of how many humps that we face in the path is, and how do we cross those humps, is something that we need to look at. And we will have some success stories, we'll have some challenges as well. I think we need to learn from each one of these and move forward.
Thanks, Rajul. We have spent good 20-25 minutes on what is the phenomenon, what is gig economy, more from an organization and an industry standpoint. Just shifting focus towards gig workers themselves. When you often talk to gig workers, they have concerns about, one, not being able to find right opportunities. Two, if they find opportunities, whether they will get paid on time or not. In many cases, they don't get paid on time at all. Some of the challenges on the systems that we have in organizations where you can get paid only after 45 to 60 days or 90 days is just not conducive for a gig worker to sustain. Unfortunately, organizations still are using the practice of using them, onboarding them as vendors, for that matter. Looking at that, I mean, if there is a consultant's view that we can bring out here, in what advice can we give for gig workers, and what advice can we give for organizations trying to attract talent on gig economy? And
So I think from a gig worker perspective, so it's like the relationship that you want to drive from your partnership with the organization as well. So one needs to be completely aware of the fact that what are the knowledge skills which are required. Am I abreast with those skills? Am I able to provide that commitment to an organization that I'm able to provide as an employee? And I am being fair in the transaction with respect to the organization as well. So I think a lot of things that we follow as an employee in an organization, I think the gig worker has to ensure that those guardrails are followed when you are actually interacting with an organization. That's point number one. Point number two is with respect to capability. Now, the capability of it, so gig workforce from an organization perspective are required for different kind of capabilities. So the responsibility therefore for the gig worker is, how do I keep myself abreast with latest changes or new happenings with respect to the area of work that I have capability in? Because the organizations will move very fast. My competition is very democratic across all the other gig workers. To say that, you know, do I really currently possess the cutting edge skill or the cutting edge capability that the organizations require right now? And therefore, the responsibility and onus of actually developing myself comes to me myself as an individual gig worker. The third aspect is, right now we leverage as employees the brand of the organization, right? When you are a gig worker, you need to create your own brand and therefore need to leverage that brand. So how do I stand up in a community of larger gig workforce who have similar kind of capabilities, but organizations are attracted towards myself? So what's my unique value proposition that I am giving to the organizations that they get attracted towards? And that value proposition could be in terms of, I'm always available, I could do good quality of job, I'm a brand by itself. You know, my resume in the resume of the organization would look much better for the organization themselves. So, you know, look at your value proposition, continue to work on your value proposition, and treat each transaction with the due fairness of how you would treat an employee-employer relationship, and stay within those guardrails as well. So that's more from an employee perspective. From an organization perspective, if the reality is this, if your business model is to leverage this as a capability, then what is it that you are doing for that community becomes very important. And therefore, how are you developing that community? How are you engaging with that community? How are you interacting with that community? Like you are interacting with your employees. So you have an engagement program, you have an onboarding program, you know, you continue to progress them on their careers. So there is a lot of investment that an organization does with respect to employees. Now treat them as another set of employees and see how you can keep them engaged, keep them involved in what you are looking at as future requirements from your perspective, so that the other side actually has the time to be able to prepare themselves. And only then will the community be more responsive towards you as compared to organization number 2, because they are also democratic from their perspective, right? They have the skills, they can work with organization A, they can work with organization B. So to use bigger names, they can do a Google versus they can do a Microsoft, right? And why should they choose to work with a Microsoft or a Google vis-a-vis the other one would depend on their relationship and how much, say for example, a Google or a Microsoft is investing on it. Or say for example, the 2 consulting firms that we represent, or the 3rd or 4th that are sitting on the audience right now as well. So it's from an organization to create that community and invest in that community across the spectrum like they would invest with their people.
I think Rajul's covered all the points. I'll not repeat. I think just 2 additional points I'd like to make. One is a slightly controversial point, but I'll still make it. I think as people from the industry representing different corporates as senior HR leaders, I think there is a ethical aspect also that we need to be conscious of. There is a little bit of a sense, actually more than a little bit of sense of misuse, okay? That this is a segment of workforce where I can squeeze costs, okay? Some of them may be in need, I can get them and I can get away with paying them less than the market value. This is not my full-time manpower. I don't need to be as conscious about treating them the way I would treat a full-time hire. So my view is that, and I always pick it up when we do work on gig strategies, gig workforce strategies, that as HR leaders especially, please remember that you set the role model. You're the role model in terms of how do you want giggers to be treated. It's as an aspect of role modeling. There is also an aspect of what I spoke about, the policies and the systems. Yes, you can talk about concerns that I'm very worried about my brand, I'm worried about moonlighting, I'm worried about conflict of interest, I'm worried kahan kaam kar raha tha, background verification hua ya nahi. But the question is that have you consciously gone and addressed it? Is there a clear conflict of interest policy in place? Is it there in every kind of contract terms and conditions do you have with any kind of gig workforce? Are you communicating it to them very specifically? Are your policies around day of joining, robust time and attendance, days worked, hours worked, robust enough so that there is no potential for misuse is minimal? Because given the spread of organizations, you're never sure that are different parts of your organizations treating gig workforce well, and to some of the points that you made are being taken care of or not. So watch out for, it's important for industry leaders to watch out on the ethical implications also of handling a large gig workforce.
Thank you. Really appreciate all the points. I would like to now open it up for questions. Anyone having any questions, please feel free. Yeah, please, go ahead.
See if the green light is on.
Hi, my name is Anil Sharma. I represent a company called Evolve Brand. So we are a classical gig economy company. We do loyalty program for some of the largest automobile in the country and FMCG. And we have a BPO, wear language, etc. We also hire FOS, feet on street. So there the conflict is, suppose we hire people in various states. How do we measure the performance? Because most of the time the conflict of interest, as you have shared, they may be working with different companies, right? I hire a person who talks to the Pancharwala or XYZ for a tire company. So there the problem is related to the integrity, number one. Is he working directly for us? How do we manage this whole integrity part, number one, and the performance part? So these are two challenges we are facing.
So my advice to actually, again, organizations, CHROs and others is that you can't answer it generically for your entire workforce, gig workforce. So number one is segment by type of jobs, because your answer would be different. What you need to do will be different for different categories of gig workforce. Also segment the type of employment. So one's the kind of role and also the type of employment. Is it a full-time role? The person is supposed to be dedicated 8 hours, 9 hours, whatever, a day, 22 days. Or is the contract itself an X hours of day, and hence you're implicitly, explicitly permitting that yes, you're not contracting for the full time. The person is open to work with others. And option number or model number 3 is outcomes. Is it an outcome-based contract that you pay for outcomes? You pay for productivity. If it's a field sales role, it's a customer service role, you pay for certain outcomes. I think it's extremely important to be able to segment your gig workforce into these categories, because what you would do will be different. Now, once you've done that, then the idea is that how specific are the terms of employment? If it's outcome based, then are those specific in terms of terms of employment? This is the base on way I pay you. If it's an hourly base, then, you know, are you clear about the hours of work? Your system's robust enough to recognize that or not? And I think it's perfectly fine if the person is working elsewhere. But, you know, given the entry time and the exit time, the login time, are you managing that carefully or not? And that's your basis for employment. I think a lot of problems just get solved with ensuring that the basics get cleaned up and managed right.
Just I'll add one point to this, and you can also overlay this with your performance expectation from that group. So, and get a mechanism to capture feedback on that.
Yeah.
So, if you look at a lot of these e-commerce players, they have democratized this process of capturing feedback, and you can do the same as well. So, feedback not necessarily needs to come from the customer, but can also come from the peer group where the individual is working. So, it's like Anurag said, you know, the more transparent you make this whole process and more clearly you define each step and have a measurable outcome discussed upfront, it becomes much easier to work.
No other way.
Yeah, one additional point I would make is, instead of employment letters, I think the scope of the service is what makes it even more stronger. So put in what your expectations are in the scope document. Secondly, what a lot of these platform players are now doing is bringing out star rating concept. At the end of every task accomplished, if there is a star that can be brought in. Perfect. I think that kind of solves for it.
This is what I was saying, democratization of feedback.
Correct. Any other question? Yes. There. Second row, please. Do you have a mic?
Hoping for Times Internet. My question here is, while we are talking about, we are still at a stage where for each business, when we talk and approach gig, it's a very customized, tailor-made conversation on why it should be there. Forever curious, what I've been forever curious about, and I would like to know from you, in your experience, all the projects that you've done with various organizations who've actually made this transformation, what are the top 2 or 3 things that business would need to know why gig is going to be an ROI for them versus thinking that it's an HR agenda or a KRA?
Okay. Fine. No, I thought it was more from an academician perspective, the question was this. Okay, fair enough. I think like we discussed in the previous example as well, whenever the need is arising from a business side, I think qualify the lead by saying what is the expectation that you're having from that ask, and can that expectation then run through that filters that I say, for example, spoke about, whether it is like an independent task or an interactive task, whether it is a repeated task or whether it is a variable task, and then you get into a framework to say, okay, now we can do this, and go back to the business to say we can do this in a manner which is full-time FTE, or we can do it through a gig manner. The advantages of full-time are these, or disadvantages are these. These are the advantages and disadvantages are these. I think this should not come across as an HR agenda, but the business should be able to see the value out of why they are making those choices. I think the responsibility of HR is to enable this agenda to the success of what we have discussed in terms of what is the value that we want to derive. So you should be able to A, provide the business those options, and B, once one of these options is taken care of or is implemented, how do you enable success of that outcome? I think that's more the role from a HR perspective, rather than pushing it as an agenda to say that I want to introduce gig workforce and therefore you push for it. I think you should be able to guide business in terms of that whole value creation to say options are these, you take a call. And slowly and steadily they'll realize that, the option which was with gig force actually made a lot of sense.
I think the three levers, and I think both of us have spoken about it over the last 45 minutes, but one is variability of demand. So every business today, every business leader, you ask them what out of the top 5 factors, what are the that they're worried about, they always talk about variability of demand, and hence need to have certain variability of costs. So it sits in beautifully in terms of that conversation. The other is actually total fixed cost commitment. There is no doubt about it, given the speed, and some of the other things that we discussed, it's always, gig is a very good cost conversation to have with business leaders, because there is clearly that the differences that we spoke about from a fixed. And the third is agility in terms of skills. And all these three, I think the business leaders get it immediately, making it one of a strategic lever for them.
Last question, anyone? Yes.
Hi sir, my name is Kunal. I'm an MBA student from IIM Ghaziabad. So I think the change in attitude towards gig economy can happen at B schools if the benefits are imbibed in the pedagogy. So, but coming from my experience, students have certain concerns in B schools. They want stable jobs, they want their return on investment. So what are some of the measures that organizations such as yours take to make such roles more attractive to students?
I think you hire more than I do. So.
I have a controversial view on this. I don't think it's right. Personal view. I don't think it's right to encourage gig at the at the education institute level. It's important for freshers to realize what's their calling, if it's really a calling. What I'm seeing, and I'm sure you'll also look at data, Gen Z, sorry, a large proportion of them come in and they say that, okay, my calling is not a long-term career with a certain organization. My calling is, it could be flexibility, it could be role, it could be pursuing my passion. It's important for them to realize their calling before they decide, if it's actually gig models that are more, or they want to become entrepreneurs, or they want to, as long as they're exposed to the idea, it's good, but there's no hurry, certainly not in an education institute level.
And it's a choice, right? So, it's just a choice, right? At the college level, you're taking a call to say whether you want to look at like a job stability, or whether you're looking at the different kind of experiences that you want to take over the next one. So right now, the good part is that you have that opportunity. I think the choice still remains with the individual, but like Anurag said, I think get some experience to be able to add that value over a gig workforce, because you'll have to eventually stand out over a larger democratized playground, right, to be able to raise your hand.
All right. So I don't think, if we were to have the whole day to talk about, I don't think we'll fall short of time. That's the amount of knowledge that you both bring in. Would you have time to have conversations with people if they have to after this?
Sure.
Yeah. So they'll be available for your conversations. We have the next session starts at 12:15. So we need to be mindful about that. We can pick it up outside. Thank you so much, both Anurag and Rajul. Really appreciate your time, and thank you so much again.
I'll request Mr. Musrat Hussain and Ms. Sabi Kidwai to please come on the stage and hand over the tokens as a gesture for our speakers.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me here. Thank you. Thanks for Thank you.